All right, we're rolling on right through. I don't know if you watched my other video, but this is going to be chapter, lordy, 3. And we are going through MRI. If you have watched my other videos, we are going through the timeline of the creation of family therapy. My chapter 0 was on individual psychotherapy before we realized that there was a system at all, that there was a connection outside of the individual. It was just the problem is within the one person. Then we had the awakening where people started realizing with Bateson, when he was looking at systems and other animals and life around us, and he's like, oh, you know what, actually there's some connections going on here. I feel like that should be brought up. Then that created the dawn of family therapy, and that's where my last video, chapter 2 on Bowen, started. That was one of the first people. Again, I wouldn't say first, absolutely first, because these people kind of came out around the same time frame, so it can't be like this one came exactly after, but he is definitely one of the first to have that system mindset where things are connected. So he's under that system umbrella in this form that I created. So we're going to go through, we rated Bowen, now we're going to go through MRI. First things first, a lot of times MRI is considered systemic. It's very confusing. It threw me for a loop, so let me start off with that. Why is it sometimes called systemic therapy? Well, again, this is all about history, context. Back in the day, there was no systemic therapy. That was, again, this was new and coming. And that whole umbrella concept of systems mindset hadn't been really a concept created quite yet. It would come later on. But because it hadn't been quite created during that time frame, some people thought MRI was the first people to think about it that way. And so in some textbooks and some study material, it is considered systemic therapy, and it makes it confusing. So when you read your exam, ask, are they asking for the overall concept of systems thinking therapy? Or are they talking about more of the individual MRI systemic therapy? And look at the wording. Are they wording it with a name like Haley Madonis? Or, sorry, of Jay Haley? Because if they're just bringing up Jay Haley, well, okay, then they're bringing it down to that one level, and they're asking just about MRI, systemic therapy. Or are they asking about systemic therapy in the bigger context, as in, what systemic therapies came out during the 1950s? So that's a broader picture. That's systemic therapy in that context, not systemic therapy in the more niche context, as in systemic therapy MRI, which again is just, it's a confusing thing that happened just because back in the day, the umbrella context hadn't been created quite yet. So people started thinking it was just MRI, not realizing, oh wait, during this time frame, lots of people started realizing that there's a system mindset towards people's behavior. Bowen, MRI, eventually we're going to go through experiential. People are going to start connecting it. But again, that's why I had to go through the ABCs and the history of these things, because things weren't making sense to me. Now it does. Systemic therapy is not just MRI, and the only reason it's used sometimes in textbooks is because during the confusion of the history, it just became known as that. So when you read those questions, really look, what are they looking for? Are they looking for the umbrella term, systemic therapy, or MRI, systemic therapy? Sorry about the confusion. Thanks, history. That's just life. So today, we're going to go through MRI, or what some places call systemic therapy, that umbrella term, but we're just going to call it MRI because that's what it really is. It's just one of the systemic therapies. Anyway, so MRI is known as a traffic engineer in a lot of study material. Again, I like to think of it as they kind of observe the traffic. So the founders were Don Jackson, Paul Watzlawick, Richard Fish, and John Weakland. And then, of course, we have some others like Jay Haley eventually does join them for a little bit, and then ends up, and this is where a lot of people get confused, Jay Haley ends up leaving and taking some information from MRI, but again, as you will learn with all my videos, answers the next step question. As we move through this timeline and people start asking more and more questions, and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper, the questions that hadn't been answered keep getting brought up. So for MRI, they wanted to see what is causing the problem. So imagine an engineer who fixes traffic jams, but the traffic jam is broken. But because the traffic pattern is broken, the MRI therapist doesn't ask who's the problem. Instead, it asks, how is this problem being kept alive? What they believe was the problem. MRI therapists believe that problems continue because people keep trying the same ineffective solutions. So that kind of reminds me of Albert Einstein, you know, the concept of insanity is trying to get some different result, but doing the same thing. And that's basically what they realized at the MRI Institute, was that things are not changing and that everything is connected. The problem isn't always the original problem. The bigger problem becomes the attempted solution. That is the heart of MRI. What they immediately or first noticed. MRI watched for interactional patterns, repeated behaviors, attempted solutions, communication loops, escalation cycles, feedback loops. Why? Because the pattern, not the individual, is maintaining the problem. Again, they didn't care about the people. They are literally looking at the traffic pattern. Okay, they're not saying, hey, there's a red SUV turned over on Highway 13. Somebody needs to check if they are okay. They're saying, we need to get somebody to move the red car from that area because it's causing a problem. Who has a tow truck and can get there right away? Like, they're just trying to stop the traffic jam. They're trying to remove it, fix it so that things can go flowing again. If that makes sense. Questions that they asked. What happens right before the problem? What have you already tried? What happens after you try that? What is the problem? Oh, when is the problem worse? When is it absent? And what would happen if no one responded? So they're really asking, like, what's happening? They're trying to figure out what's going on. Why are these connections going the way they are? Why? The problem leads to the solution, but when the solution doesn't work, you keep trying. And so the problem gets worse, so you try even harder. And eventually, the attempted solution becomes the problem. That happens a lot. When families keep making the same move, the therapist changes the pattern, not the person. Again, this is not about the person. We're just trying to figure out, how do we get this traffic jam removed? So the founder story for MRI. So MRI became modern systemic therapy. And again, we only know it as systemic therapy in the context of people just didn't know it at the time. Okay, that's it. But in some contexts, again, just read your question really well to figure out which way they're trying to use that word. Are they using it in the broader context of the umbrella term, as in everything that came after individual psychotherapy time frame, or are they looking at it just in the MRI? That's when you look for those keywords that tell you it's MRI specific. If they say something like a feedback loop, again, looking for those traffic behaviors, things like that, then, then it's definitely MRI. If they bring up the word Haley or Don Jackson, that's MRI. Rather than the broader thing of, what happened after, during the systemic therapy time, era, what came after, I don't know, something in a little bit broader context. So MRI became modern systemic therapy. The pioneers were influenced by communication, cybernetics, and systems thinking. And if you've watched my other videos, you know exactly what they're talking about. That's why it's so important you watch my other videos, because, again, everything builds from something else. These pioneers came back from the individual psychotherapy time frame, again, where, communications was looking at connections between people communicating. Cybernetics was looking at systems. We started getting to more of that system mentality. So MRI was highly influenced by all of them. But rather than asking why people develop symptoms, they became fascinated by why symptoms persisted. They noticed that families often become trapped by repeatedly using the same unsuccessful solutions. This insight led to the development of a brief, because this is considered a brief therapy, but present focus, again, we're not looking in the back or in the past, model centered on changing interactional patterns rather than uncovering historical ones. Again, we're talking about the now. They're not changing. We can't go back and change what grandma and grandpa did. They're dead. So don't even think about historical, because that doesn't make sense. We're looking about right now, what's happening right now, keeping this pattern going. So why? Again, that's always my big thing, and what kept me hooked up and struggling is I need to know the why. Why are we doing stuff? So MRI therapists believe no person's behavior exists in isolation. Every action influences another person, who then responds, creating a continuous feedback loop. Here we go. The goal isn't to find a bad family member, it is to understand how the system is organized and to help it function differently. Why is MRI considered a systemic model? Because MRI therapists believe no person's behavior exists in isolation, and that's why it fits under that systemic model. Again, after a certain time frame, if you've been following my videos, we were no longer a single-minded mindset. We realized there was a system. It's all connected. We are humans. We are connected. So goals of MRI are to interrupt the cycle. Again, got to stop. We got to change it. We got to change something, interrupt it, move that car out of the way, add a car in the way so people have to go to a different route. I mean, again, it's all about manipulating the system. So stop ineffective attempted solutions. So, hey, stop trying to go this way. You're going to keep getting a traffic jam. Go over there. Create a new interaction. Again, kind of like what I said. Reduce the symptom. Promote flexibility. Why? Because when the interaction changes, the symptoms often change too. Kind of like domino reaction. Interventions. So interventions for MRI were prescribing the symptom. So ask clients to intentionally perform the symptom. Why? Because the symptoms loses its automatic quality and disrupts the cycle. Again, we're just trying to just change things up. We're like, okay, you know what? Let's just change things up. You know what? Do more of that. So this is what when I was reading this last night, this is all about creating change in the moment. So prescribing. So this is all about change. We want if you see something that's all about like action change, that's probably MRI. So prescribing the symptoms, behavior directives, again, restraining, interrupting, paradoxical intervention. These are all action, do these, we're twisting, we're changing that system, we're tweaking it. So behavior directives, assigning tasks that interrupt the pattern. So why? Because talking rarely changes pattern, but doing things does. So we're giving you directives. Go do this. Restraining, warning families that change may happen slowly. So again, we're informing. Why? This reduces pressure and resistance. Again, just reminding people, hey, this is going to take some time. We're changing behaviors, but go with it because eventually something's going to happen. Something's going to change. Interrupting feedback loops. So change one part of the interaction. Why? Because systems reorganize when one part changes. And that is all, remember, they're pulling a lot. These are all building blocks. They're pulling a lot from Bateson when he was talking about, what he realized happens culturally through time with animals. Again, a lot of that pattern recognition. Next, he had paradoxical interventions, which is, again, a do. So prescribing or exaggerating the behavior. And why? Because resistance often creates change. All of these things are actions. We're trying to change the pattern. We're trying to do something different. If you going around in this loop is making no sense, well then get off and do this other ramp. Do something different. So the strengths for MRI were that it's brief. It is considered brief therapy. It helps great with behavioral problems, relational conflicts. Pretty much any family that's stuck in a repeated cycle. It helps against resistance. It's great for communication problems. MRI focused directly on the present interaction, maintaining the symptoms. Some of the weaknesses that people felt was that it underemphasized trauma history, and attachment issues and emotions. So it doesn't address any of the emotions. It doesn't address any of that stuff. Remember, it's just talking. And this is the other thing that I've noticed. The more I keep learning more about kind of as the beginning therapies, the ones on the top, the very beginning, like these ones, they're answering questions. But what you'll see is that all of them answer questions, but not any one of them is complete within itself. Okay, and that's where, as a therapist, I'm sure you've heard, you have your toolbox of therapy solutions, because not all of them address everything. They're all missing some piece. And that's why sometimes, we can't all just be like, I can't just all be MRI, because then I'm never going to look at the emotions. I have to pull in some other stuff from other therapies to fill in that area. But at least in these, and how I'm trying to, what I've realized is with each therapy though, it is great for a certain situation, a certain, like for this one, if you have a family that's in the same cycle, perfect. Use this, break them out of the cycle, and then you can start addressing emotions. Does that make sense? So clues, if you find these words in the exam, would be vicious cycles, feedback loops, first order change, second order change, brief therapy, MRI, interactional patterns, communication, present focus, paradox, or of course, if they just say Mental Research Institute, they're talking about MRI. Memorizing material. Why does everyone keep driving in the same traffic cycle? The traffic pattern, the interactional cycle, is causing the jam. MRI therapist says, so what have you tried? The family says everything. The MRI therapist says, great, let's stop doing that. If digging a hole isn't helping, why grab a bigger shovel? Again, change it. Here's some examples. A teen stays in room, mom nags. Teen withdraws more, mom nags louder. Teen isolates even more. Nobody is evil. Everyone is just accidentally feeding the cycle. So, question. Parents repeatedly increase punishment, but the child's behavior worsens. So the attempted solutions are maintaining the problem. Another example, a husband withdraws, his wife pursues. He withdraws more, she pursues harder. He shuts down completely, she becomes louder. MRI says, nobody is the villain, the cycle is. Change on person's response, the whole cycle changes. Question, here's another one. Parent has tried everything and nothing works. Grounding, rewards charts, taking away electronics, extra chores. Therapist says, let's look at how these attempted solutions may actually be maintaining the problem. That's MRI, because the clue is they have attempted solutions. Anytime you see an attempted solution, a try to break the cycle, again, the attempted solution is to break the cycle, that's MRI 100% on the exam. Another question, parents repeatedly increase punishment, but the child's behavior worsens. MRI would most likely conclude the attempted solution is maintaining the problem. A therapist focuses on interrupting repetitive interactional cycles. That's MRI. So MRI catchphrases, the solution becomes a problem, stop feeding the cycle, change one interaction, change the system, the pattern is the patient, what have you already tried? Why does everyone keep driving the same traffic cycle? The structure might be perfectly fine, but the traffic pattern is causing the jam. Why does the problem keep happening? Interesting. Now, how do I outsmart the problem? He is fascinated by how to create change. Some other examples. Attempted solutions, feedback loops, or communication patterns. That's always MRI again. MRI, ask why the pattern survives. So example, husband withdraws, wife pursues, he withdraws more, she pursues harder. 20 years later, they're still doing it. MRI says, I don't actually need to know what happened on your honeymoon, I just need this to stop. Why? Because they believe once the interaction changes, the system reorganizes itself again. So again, one domino moves, everything changes. Example, child throws tantrum, parents yell, child screams louder, parents yell louder. MRI says, MRI doesn't ask, when do the tantrums begin? MRI asks, what happens every single time this happens? Again, they're looking for the pattern. Answer, child screams, parents yell, child wins attention, parents become exhausted, child repeats. MRI immediately knows where to intervene. So why is it called brief therapy? MRI believes that small changes in interactional patterns can provide large changes in the entire system. MRI isn't trying to solve depression or anxiety. It doesn't really care about marriage or childhood trauma or communication issues. It doesn't care about self-esteem or identity. And it's definitely not trying to focus on one thing at a time. They are trying to solve the interaction maintaining everything. That's all it is. Again, this is a piece. A lot of times when I was studying, I kept thinking like, oh, that, I know we do pieces, but maybe one therapy does it all. No, this therapy does this piece of help. This helps the pattern breaking. That's what this one's for, and only that. Hint, think traffic. Traffic is backed up. MRI doesn't interview every driver. It changes one traffic light, and suddenly the traffic moves. That's brief. MRI is called brief therapy, not simply because it uses fewer sessions, but because its theory assumes that changing one key interaction pattern can create ripple effects throughout the entire system. Again, kind of what the other one said. Sometimes hearing it different ways, something clicks differently. Therapists believe, oh, here we go. So here's some questions. Therapists believes that small changes in present interactional patterns can quickly eliminate symptoms. Keywords for me were interactional patterns. Quickly eliminating symptoms. The patterns, the drive, quickly changing it, that's MRI. Therapist is less interested in historical causes than current interactional cycles. Again, interactional cycles, the moment you see something like that, that's MRI. And again, they don't care about history. They don't care about any of that. Therapist expects meaningful change within relatively few sessions. Sorry, sometimes I can't read my handwriting. Within relatively few sessions. So again, this is brief therapy. You're going to get that change because, again, they think that the moment you move one domino piece, it changes the whole outcome, which is true. That's my little one. Again, we are done with this section of MRI therapy. I will do another one. I've got to do one on strategic therapy that ends up eventually turning into Haley Madonnas, which is, again, whole historical. That's why this works for me better for comprehension. And yes, strategic and Haley Madonnas do come from MRI because if you remember, Haley came from MRI. He was a part of that group at one point. And then later on, Madonnas joined him and he expanded even more. So welcome to the history. I hope you enjoyed this MRI section. I hope you do really well. Again, I know it was really rough and I apologize for the dog barking and the kid craziness. I am just one therapist trying to make a living, trying to help others any way that I can. And hopefully this little video helped you have a better understanding about MRI. All right. If you received any good content from this, even one piece of information that helped you understand this theory any better than you had prior, please let me know. If something was wrong, please let me know as well. Or if you have any other insight or anything, please let me know. Again, all with love. I'm just trying to help other people out. And I hope you do really well. Sending all the good jujus to you. I'm taking my national exam again on the 22nd of August. So all the prayers and good jujus out there for everybody who is in the same boat or likewise. Or if you just wanted to brush up on MRI, hey, awesome too. But please follow, like, share, all the good shit. And let's spread love. And more than anything, we need more therapists out in the world. So if I can make this where a therapist understands these theories and is able to become a therapist, then man, I'm going to do it. All right, family. Good luck. Bye.